At 91 years old, I thought I had seen it all. I was Elizabeth Eleanor Harrison, a woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had survived the Great Depression, World War II, and every economic downturn America had thrown at us. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the devastating betrayal that was about to unfold on what should have been the most beautiful day of my life. It was October 15th, 2023, my 91st birthday, and I was sitting in my favorite rocking chair on the wraparound porch of the Victorian home I had called home for 63 years in Salem, Oregon. The autumn leaves were painting the world in shades of gold and crimson, just like they had every October since 1960, when my late husband, William, and I first bought this house with our savings from the hardware store we ran together. My two children, Thomas and Laura, had promised me the surprise of a lifetime. "Mom, you're going to absolutely love what we have planned," Laura had said over the phone just 3 days earlier, her voice carrying that same sweet tone she'd used as a little girl when she wanted something. Thomas, my eldest at 67, had been equally mysterious. "Just pack a small bag, Mom. Trust us." Trust. That word would haunt me for months to come. As I sat there that morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and orange, I reflected on the life I had built. After William passed away 15 years ago from a heart attack, I had single-handedly expanded our small hardware store into Harrison's Home and Garden Centers, a chain of 12 locations across Oregon and Washington. I had worked 16-hour days well into my 70s, not because I had to, but because I wanted to leave something meaningful for Thomas and Laura. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled me from my memories. A sleek black Mercedes pulled into my driveway, not the kind of car either of my children owned. Thomas emerged from the driver's seat, wearing an expensive suit I had never seen before, his face carrying an expression I couldn't quite read. Laura stepped out of the passenger side, her designer handbag catching the morning light, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Happy birthday, Mom," they called out in unison, but something felt rehearsed, artificial. "Where's your car, Thomas?" I asked as he helped me down the porch steps. My joints weren't what they used to be, but my mind was still sharp as a tack. "Oh, it's in the shop," he replied quickly, avoiding my gaze. "This is a rental. Only the best for your special day." As we drove through the familiar streets of Salem, I noticed we were heading in the opposite direction of downtown, away from my favorite restaurant where we usually celebrated family occasions. The further we traveled, the more uneasy I became. Laura kept typing on her phone, her manicured fingers moving rapidly across the screen, while Thomas stared straight ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, my voice carrying a tremor. I hoped they wouldn't notice. "It's a surprise, Mom," Laura said without looking up from her phone. "You'll see." 20 minutes later, we pulled into the circular driveway of what looked like a luxury hotel. But as my eyes focused on the brass plaque beside the entrance, my blood ran cold. "Sunset Manor, Premium Senior Living Community." "What is this?" I whispered, my heart beginning to race. "Why are we here?" Thomas turned off the engine and finally looked at me, his eyes lacking the warmth I had known for 67 years. "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time." "Time for what?" I demanded, though somewhere deep in my soul, I already knew. Laura finally put down her phone and turned to face me. "You can't live alone anymore, Mom. You're 91. What if you fall? What if something happens? This place is beautiful. They have activities, nurses on staff 24/7, gourmet meals." The words hit me like physical blows. I had been cooking for myself, driving to the grocery store, managing my investments, and overseeing my business just fine. Yes, I moved a little slower, but my mind was still sharp, my independence intact. "I don't need this," I said, my voice rising. "I want to go home. Now." But they were already getting out of the car. A woman in scrubs appeared as if on cue, her smile too bright, too practiced. "Mrs. Harrison, welcome to Sunset Manor. I'm Emily, the head of admissions. We have your room already." My room. How did they know I was coming? How long had this been planned? Please, I begged, as Thomas took my arm, gently but firmly guiding me toward the entrance. I don't want this. I want to stay in my home. Mom, we've already made the arrangements, Laura said, her voice taking on a tone of finality. We've paid the first year in advance. Your furniture is being moved tomorrow. The world seemed to spin around me. My furniture, without asking me. Without even giving me a chance to say goodbye to the home where I had raised my children, where I had loved my husband, where I had built my dreams. As we walked through the lobby with its generic artwork and the smell of industrial disinfectant, masked by artificial air fresheners, I felt like I was walking to my own funeral. Other residents sat in wheelchairs and walkers, some staring blankly at a television, others sleeping in their chairs. This wasn't living, this was waiting to die. Your room is on the second floor, Emily chirped as we entered the elevator. You have a lovely view of our garden. The room was sterile, impersonal beige walls, a hospital bed, a small dresser, and a chair by the window. It was clean, functional, and utterly devoid of life. Everything that made me who I was, my photographs, my books, my memories, was absent. The dining room serves meals at 8, 12, and 5:30, Emily continued her rehearsed speech. Activities start at 10 a.m. with chair yoga, followed by craft time. I stopped listening. I turned to my children, these people I had given birth to, raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. How could you do this to me? Thomas's jaw was set, his mind made up. Mom, it's for your own good. We worry about you constantly. Since when? I shot back. Since when do you worry about me? You visit once a month, if I'm lucky. You barely call. Laura stepped forward, her voice taking on that condescending tone parents use with small children. Mom, you're being dramatic. This is a beautiful place. You'll make friends. Friends. As if the relationships I had built over 9 decades meant nothing. As if the ladies at my bridge club, my neighbors who checked on me, the employees at my stores who respected and valued my input, as if none of that mattered. I built a business from nothing, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. I raised 2 children as a single mother after your father died. I've been taking care of myself just fine. About the business, Mom, Thomas said, and something in his tone made my stomach drop. We think it's time you stepped back from that too. Let us handle things. Let them handle things. My life's work. The stores that bore our family name. The employees who depended on those jobs. The customers who had been coming to us for generations. What exactly does that mean? I asked, though I was beginning to fear the answer. We've been consulting with lawyers, Laura said, pulling a folder from her designer handbag. We think you should sign over power of attorney, just in case your health declines. My health was fine. My doctor had given me a clean bill of health just 2 months ago. My blood pressure was better than Thomas's, and my cholesterol levels were lower than Laura's had been at her last physical. I'm not signing anything, I said firmly. Thomas's mask of false concern slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. Mom, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you. Help me. By imprisoning me. By taking away everything that gave my life meaning. By treating me like a child who couldn't make her own decisions. That first night in Sunset Manor was the longest of my life. I lay in the narrow hospital bed, listening to the sounds of a place that would never be home, the beeping of machines, the shuffling of night staff, the occasional cry from another room. I thought about my house, probably dark and empty now, waiting for strangers to come and pack up my life into boxes. I thought about my wedding china, still in the dining room cabinet where I had placed it in 1960, about the garden William and I had planted together, the roses we had tended for 40 years, about the rocking chair where I had nursed both my babies, where I had read them bedtime stories, where I had watched them grow up. All of it would be gone. Decided by 2 people who saw me not as their mother, but as a burden to be managed. The next morning, I met Clara, my roommate. She was 88, had been at Sunset Manor for 3 years, and her story was heartbreakingly similar to mine. Her son had convinced her to try it out for a few weeks, and then never came to take her home. They visit on Christmas and Mother's Day, Clara said as we sat in the dining room, picking at scrambled eggs that tasted like rubber. They bring me flowers and tell me how good I look, how happy I seem. They want to believe their own lies. Over the following weeks, I learned that my story wasn't unique. There was George, 85, whose daughter had sold his house while he was in the hospital recovering from hip surgery. There was Evelyn, 92, whose grandson had cleaned out her bank accounts while she was temporarily at Sunset Manor. We were a community of the discarded, the inconvenient, the forgotten. But I wasn't ready to be forgotten. During visiting hours, I would watch the entrance, hoping against hope that Thomas or Laura would come, that they would realize their mistake and take me home. When they finally did visit, 2 weeks after my imprisonment began, they brought grocery store flowers and patronizing smiles. "You look great, Mom," Laura exclaimed, as if my appearance in this place was somehow a victory. "See, we knew you'd adjust." Adjust, as if accepting this betrayal was something to celebrate. "I want to go home," I said simply. Thomas shook his head. "Mom, we've already started the process of selling the house. The market is hot right now, and frankly, you need the money to pay for this place." Selling my house. Without my consent, without even asking me. "That's my house," I said, my voice rising. "You have no right." "Actually, Mom," Laura said, pulling out another folder. "We do. We had a lawyer draw up some papers. Since you're in care now, we can make decisions in your best interest." They had planned this. Every detail, every step. They had been plotting to steal my life while smiling to my face, while accepting my birthday gifts and Christmas presents, while letting me believe that my children loved me. "You can't do this," I whispered. "It's already done, Mom," Thomas said, not even trying to hide his impatience anymore. "The house will be on the market next week. We'll put the money into a trust to pay for your care here, a trust they would control. Money I had earned being used to pay for a prison I had never agreed to enter." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Clara's labored breathing from the next bed. I thought about all the residents I had met, all the stories of betrayal and abandonment. We were America's forgotten generation, the ones who had built this country only to be discarded when we became inconvenient. But something Clara had said earlier was echoing in my mind. The one thing they can't take from you is your voice. Elizabeth, as long as you can speak, you can fight. My voice. For 91 years, I had used it to build a business, to raise my children, to contribute to my community. Maybe it was time to use it again. The next morning, I asked Emily if I could use the phone to call my business. "Of course, Mrs. Harrison," she said with that practiced smile. "You can use the phone in the activities room." I called Harrison's Home and Garden, the flagship store I had built from a tiny hardware shop. Susan, my store manager for 15 years, answered. "Mrs. Harrison, we've been so worried. Thomas and Laura said you were unwell." Unwell. Another lie. "Susan, I need your help," I said quietly, "and I need you to listen very carefully." Over the next hour, I learned the extent of my children's betrayal. They had told my employees I was suffering from dementia. They had presented themselves as my caregivers, making decisions in my best interest. They had already begun the process of selling 2 of the smaller locations. "But Mrs. Harrison," Susan said, confusion clear in her voice, "you sound completely fine, sharp as ever." "That's because I am fine, Susan. My children have lied to everyone. They've stolen my freedom, and now they're trying to steal my business." That phone call was the first step in what would become my fight for justice. Susan, bless her heart, didn't hesitate. "What do you need me to do, Mrs. Harrison?" "I need you to document everything," I said. "Every decision Thomas and Laura have made, every paper they've asked you to sign, every change they've implemented. And Susan, I need you to contact my lawyer, Charles Bennett. Tell him Elizabeth Harrison needs to see him urgently, and it's about my children trying to steal my life." Charles Bennett had been my attorney for 25 years. He had handled William's estate, my business contracts, everything. If anyone could help me, it was him. But first, I had to survive in this place while planning my escape. The days at Sunset Manor blurred together in a monotonous routine designed to break the spirit. Wake at 6 a.m. to the sound of staff changing shifts. Breakfast at 8, always the same lukewarm oatmeal or rubbery eggs. Chair yoga at 10, which I refused to attend. Lunch at noon. Craft time in the afternoon, where grown adults were expected to glue popsicle sticks together like kindergarteners. Dinner at 5:30, lights out by 9 p.m. This wasn't living, it was existing, waiting to die. But I wasn't ready to die, and I sure as hell wasn't ready to let my children get away with this. 3 days after my call to Susan, Charles Bennett arrived at Sunset Manor. He was 73 now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. When Emily tried to escort him to the common area for our meeting, he politely but firmly insisted on privacy. "Mrs. Harrison," he said once we were alone in a small conference room, "Susan filled me in on some of the situation, but I need to hear it from you. Start from the beginning." I told him everything. The surprise birthday trip, the move to Sunset Manor without my consent, the planned sale of my house, the takeover of my business. Charles took notes, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Elizabeth," he said when I finished, "what your children have done is called elder abuse. It's a felony in Oregon." Elder abuse. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had heard the term before, seen it in the news, but I had never imagined it would apply to me. I was Elizabeth Harrison, businesswoman, mother, pillar of the community. How had I become a victim? "The good news is that they haven't been able to legally take control of your affairs yet," Charles continued. "You never signed power of attorney, and you're clearly mentally competent. But they're working on it. Susan said they've been pressuring her to sign affidavits stating that you're unfit to run the business. My own employees, people I had hired and trained and treated like family, being manipulated by my children to betray me. It was almost too much to bear. What can we do?" I asked. Charles leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "We fight. But it's going to be difficult. Your children have positioned themselves as concerned caregivers, and society tends to believe adult children over elderly parents. We'll need evidence, witnesses, documentation." Over the next 2 weeks, Charles and I developed our strategy. Susan became our inside source at the business, documenting every suspicious action by Thomas and Laura. Charles's paralegal, a sharp young woman named Rachel, began investigating the legality of my placement at Sunset Manor. What we discovered was shocking. Thomas and Laura had been planning this for over a year. They had consulted with elder care attorneys about how to gain control of an unwilling parent's assets. They had researched facilities and even put deposits down at 3 different locations before choosing Sunset Manor. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision made out of concern for my welfare. This was a calculated theft of my life, my freedom, and my fortune. But the most devastating discovery came from Rachel's investigation into my placement. Thomas and Laura had told the facility that I had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. They had forged a doctor's signature on admission papers, stating that I was a danger to myself and others. A danger to myself? I had been living independently, running a successful business, managing my own finances, and maintaining my own home. But because I was 91, because I was their mother, because I had money they wanted, I was suddenly a danger. The forged documents were our smoking gun. Charles immediately filed for an emergency hearing to challenge my placement and to expose my children's fraud. But Thomas and Laura weren't going to go down without a fight. 3 days before our scheduled court date, Emily informed me that I had visitors. I expected to see Charles or maybe Susan, but instead, Thomas and Laura walked into the visiting room, their faces hard with anger. "Mom," Thomas said, without preamble, "we know what you're trying to do. It needs to stop." Laura pulled a chair close to mine, her voice taking on that fake sweet tone again. "Mom, you're embarrassing yourself, and you're embarrassing us. People are talking. They think we're bad children." "You are bad children," I said quietly. You stole my life. Thomas's facade cracked completely. We didn't steal anything. We saved you from yourself. You're 91 years old, Mom. You could have died alone in that house, and no one would have found you for days. That was my choice to make, I replied. Not yours. You don't get to make choices anymore. Laura snapped, her true nature finally showing. You're old. You're a liability. Do you have any idea how much money we've spent on this place? How much time we've wasted dealing with your stubbornness? There it was. The truth. I wasn't their beloved mother who needed care. I was a liability to be managed, an inconvenience to be dealt with. And another thing, Thomas continued, his voice rising. If you don't drop this ridiculous lawsuit, we'll make sure you never see another penny of your money. We'll have you declared incompetent, and you'll spend the rest of your miserable life in the state facility eating government cheese. They were threatening me. My own children, people I had sacrificed everything for, were threatening to make my final years a living hell if I didn't submit to their theft. You can try, I said, standing up with as much dignity as I could muster. But I'm not the helpless old woman you think I am. I built an empire while you were learning to tie your shoes, and I'll be damned if I let you destroy it now. Laura's face twisted with rage. You're a selfish old woman who can't accept that her time is over. You should be grateful we're taking care of you instead of fighting us every step of the way. Taking care of me. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. You've imprisoned me, stolen my home, and are trying to steal my business. If this is how you take care of someone you love, I'd hate to see how you treat your enemies. Thomas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Fine, you want to fight. We'll fight. But don't come crying to us when you lose everything. After they left, I sat in that sterile visiting room and cried for the first time since arriving at Sunset Manor. Not tears of sadness or self-pity, but tears of rage and determination. My children had underestimated me. They thought that because I was old, I was weak. They thought that because I was their mother, I would forgive anything. They were wrong on both counts. The day of our court hearing dawned gray and rainy, as if the Pacific Northwest weather was reflecting the darkness of the situation. Charles arrived early to pick me up, and for the first time in 2 months, I left the grounds of Sunset Manor. The courthouse in downtown Salem was familiar. I had been there many times over the years for business matters, property disputes, the usual legal issues that come with running a successful company. But I had never been there fighting for my own freedom. Thomas and Laura were already seated with their attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who probably specialized in elder law and family disputes. They didn't look at me as Charles and I took our seats at the plaintiff's table. The Honorable Judge Catherine Morgan presided, a woman in her 60s who had a reputation for fairness and no tolerance for legal shenanigans. She reviewed our emergency petition with careful attention before addressing the courtroom. This court has been asked to review the circumstances surrounding Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison's placement at Sunset Manor Senior Living Community. Judge Morgan began. The petition alleges that this placement was made without Mrs. Harrison's consent and based on fraudulent medical documentation. Thomas and Laura's attorney, Mr. Douglas, stood immediately. Your Honor, my clients are loving children who made a difficult but necessary decision to ensure their mother's safety and well-being. Mrs. Harrison is 91 years old and was living alone in a large house where she could have suffered a fall or medical emergency with no one to help her. Your Honor, Charles countered, Mrs. Harrison is mentally competent, physically capable, and was living independently, without incident. Her children orchestrated this placement not out of concern, but to gain control of her substantial assets. Judge Morgan looked directly at me. Mrs. Harrison, I'd like to hear from you directly. Do you feel that your placement at Sunset Manor was necessary for your health and safety? I stood up, my voice clear and strong. Your Honor, I was kidnapped. That's the plain truth of it. My children lied to me, tricked me into getting in their car, and delivered me to a facility where I've been held against my will for 2 months. They forged medical documents. They're trying to steal my home and my business, and they've done it all while pretending to act in my best interest. A murmur went through the courtroom. Judge Morgan called for order. Mrs. Harrison, she continued, can you tell me about your current mental and physical condition? Your Honor, I can recite every quarterly profit report from my business for the past 5 years. I can tell you the exact balance in each of my 7 bank accounts. I know the names of all 43 employees across my 12 stores. I drive, I cook, I manage my own medications, and until 2 months ago, I was living independently in the same house I've called home for 63 years. Charles stepped forward with a folder. Your Honor, we have medical records showing that Mrs. Harrison's doctor never diagnosed her with dementia or declared her unfit for independent living. The signature on the admission papers to Sunset Manor has been analyzed by a handwriting expert and determined to be a forgery. The courtroom erupted. Mr. Douglas was on his feet objecting, but Judge Morgan silenced him with a look that could freeze water. Are you telling me, Judge Morgan said slowly, that medical documents were forged to facilitate this placement? That's exactly what we're telling you, Your Honor, Charles replied. Mrs. Harrison's children committed fraud to steal her freedom. Thomas and Laura looked panicked now, whispering frantically with their attorney. Laura was actually crying, though whether from genuine remorse or fear of consequences, I couldn't tell. Judge Morgan called for a 15-minute recess to review the evidence. When court reconvened, her expression was thunderous. In 40 years on the bench, she began, I have rarely seen such a clear case of elder abuse masquerading as filial concern. The evidence before this court shows that Mrs. Elizabeth Harrison was placed at Sunset Manor through fraud, deception, and forged documents. She turned to Thomas and Laura. Mr. and Ms. Harrison, your actions constitute elder abuse, fraud, and false imprisonment. I am ordering the immediate release of your mother from Sunset Manor, and I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, but our victory in court was only the beginning of the real battle. Within hours of the judge's ruling, news of the case had spread throughout Salem's business community. The local newspaper ran a front-page story. Local businesswoman wins freedom from children's elder abuse. The story detailed the forged documents, the forced institutionalization, and the attempted theft of my assets. Thomas and Laura were facing serious criminal charges, but they weren't going quietly. Their response was swift and vicious. The next morning, I returned to my house for the first time in 2 months. Charles had arranged for me to stay with my neighbor, Helen, until I could assess the damage to my home and my life. What I found broke my heart. The house where I had lived for 63 years, where I had raised my children and mourned my husband, looked like it had been ransacked. Furniture was missing, family photographs had been removed from their frames, and boxes of my personal belongings were stacked in the garage, apparently ready for donation or disposal. My wedding china was gone. William's war medals were missing. The family Bible, where I had recorded births and deaths for 3 generations, had vanished. They hadn't just tried to steal my freedom, they had tried to erase my history. Helen, who had been my neighbor and friend for 40 years, helped me search through the remaining boxes. Elizabeth, she said, tears in her eyes, they came with a truck, said you were sick, that you'd never be coming home. They took everything that had any value. In the kitchen, I found a note from Laura, written in her neat handwriting. Mom, we donated most of your old things to charity. You won't need them where you're going. Try to understand that this is for the best. Love, Laura, love. She signed it with love. That afternoon, Charles arrived with more devastating news. Elizabeth, they've been busy while you were in Sunset Manor. They've mortgaged your house, liquidated 2 of your retirement accounts, and sold 4 of your rental properties. I sat down heavily in my rocking chair, one of the few pieces of furniture they hadn't taken. How is that possible? I never signed anything. Forged signatures again, Charles said grimly. They've gotten very good at it. We can fight it, but it's going to take time, and in the meantime, you're in serious financial trouble. The scope of their betrayal was staggering. While I was locked away in Sunset Manor, helpless and isolated, My children had systematically dismantled the life I had spent 9 decades building. But I had survived the Great Depression. I had buried my husband and rebuilt my life. I had turned a tiny hardware store into a 12-location empire. I wasn't about to let 2 spoiled, greedy children destroy me now. Charles, I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning inside me, I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I want to make sure this never happens to another family. Over the next 6 months, the criminal case against Thomas and Laura made headlines across Oregon. The DA's office called it one of the most egregious cases of elder abuse they had ever prosecuted. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, fraudulent financial transactions, false imprisonment, and theft totaling nearly $2 million. During the trial, I took the stand and told my story to a packed courtroom. I spoke about the betrayal of trust, the violation of the sacred bond between parent and child, and the systematic theft of not just my money, but my dignity and freedom. These aren't my children anymore, I testified. The children I raised would never have done this to anyone, let alone their own mother. The people sitting at that defense table are strangers to me, strangers who happen to share my DNA. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Thomas was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Laura received 3 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution, though much of my money had already been spent on their lavish lifestyles and legal fees. But the most satisfying moment came when the judge addressed them. Before sentencing, in my 30 years on the bench, Judge Morgan said, I have seen many crimes, but few as morally reprehensible as what you have done to your own mother. You didn't just steal her money, you tried to steal her soul. You are a disgrace to the concepts of family and basic human decency. The gavel came down, and my children, former children, were led away in handcuffs. As I left the courthouse that day, reporters surrounded me, asking how I felt about my children going to prison. I thought carefully before answering. I feel relief, I said. Relief that justice was served, relief that other elderly people might be spared what I went through, and relief that I can finally move forward with my life. But moving forward wasn't easy. The financial damage was extensive. My house was heavily mortgaged, my retirement accounts depleted, and several of my business properties had been sold for far below market value. At 92, I faced the prospect of rebuilding my life from scratch. That's when something wonderful happened. My story had resonated with people across the country. Letters poured in from elderly Americans who had faced similar betrayals from their own families. Support came from unexpected places. Susan, my loyal store manager, had organized the employees of all 12 Harrison's locations. They had been pooling their resources and had saved the business during the chaos of the legal battle. Mrs. Harrison, Susan said when she presented me with the financial reports, we weren't going to let your life's work disappear. This company is part of all of us. My customers, many of whom had been shopping with us for decades, had organized boycotts against competitors and fundraising efforts to help me rebuild. The community I had served for so many years was serving me in return. Local banks, learning of my situation, offered to refinance my properties at favorable rates. A group of investors, impressed by my resilience and business acumen, provided capital to expand the chain. Within a year, Harrison's Home and Garden Centers was not just surviving, it was thriving. We had added 2 new locations and increased our workforce by 30%. More importantly, I had found a new purpose. Working with Charles and other attorneys, I helped draft legislation to strengthen elder abuse protections in Oregon. The Elizabeth Harrison Act created stricter oversight of guardianship proceedings and harsher penalties for financial exploitation of elderly people. I began speaking at conferences and community events, sharing my story and educating other seniors about protecting themselves from family members who might see them as opportunities rather than loved ones. Trust, but verify, became my motto. Love your family, but protect yourself. On my 93rd birthday, exactly 2 years after the day my nightmare began, I celebrated not at Sunset Manor, but but in the garden of my own home, surrounded by friends, employees, and neighbors who had become my chosen family, Helen raised a toast. To Elizabeth Harrison, proof that you're never too old to fight back. As I looked around at the faces of people who truly cared about me, I realized something profound. Thomas and Laura had tried to steal my life, but in the process, they had given me something unexpected. They had shown me who my real family was. It wasn't the people who shared my blood but betrayed my trust. It was the people who stood by me when I needed them most, who fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, who saw value in me beyond my bank account. That night, as I sat in my rocking chair on the porch where this story began, I thought about the lessons I had learned. I had always believed that family was everything, that blood was thicker than water. But I had learned that loyalty is earned, not inherited. That love is demonstrated through actions, not just words. And that sometimes, the family we create is stronger than the family we're born into. I also thought about forgiveness. People often asked me if I had forgiven Thomas and Laura, if I regretted seeing my own children go to prison. The answer was complicated. I had forgiven them in the sense that I no longer carried the poison of hatred in my heart. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean excusing their actions. They had made their choices, and they would have to live with the consequences. As for regret, I regretted that they had become people capable of such cruelty. I regretted that I had failed somewhere in raising them, though I still couldn't identify where I had gone wrong. But I didn't regret fighting back. I didn't regret exposing them. And I didn't regret the fact that they were paying for their crimes. Some people might think that's harsh, that a mother should protect her children no matter what. But part of being a parent is teaching right from wrong. And sometimes the only way adult children learn that lesson is through consequences. Now, at 94, I wake up every morning in my own home, in my own bed, surrounded by my own things. I make my own breakfast, tend my own garden, and run my own business. I am not a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved. I am Elizabeth Eleanor Harrison, and I am exactly where I belong. My story spread far beyond Salem, Oregon. I received thousands of letters from elderly people across America who saw their own struggles reflected in mine. I heard from seniors who had been pressured to sign over power of attorney, who had been moved to facilities against their will, who had watched their life savings disappear into the pockets of greedy relatives. But I also heard from adult children who had been inspired to examine their own relationships with their aging parents. Some wrote to thank me for reminding them that their parents deserved respect and dignity, not just care. The most meaningful letter came from a woman in Florida whose 89-year-old father had been fighting a similar battle with his sons. After reading about my case, she had hired an attorney and helped her father regain control of his life. "Your courage gave us courage," she wrote. "Thank you for showing us that it's never too late to fight back." That's what I want people to remember about my story. Not the betrayal. Betrayal is as old as humanity itself. Not the money. Money can be lost and found again. What I want them to remember is that dignity and self-determination don't expire at 65 or 75 or 85 or 95. As long as your mind is clear and your will is strong, you have the right to make your own choices about your own life. You have the right to live where you want to live, to spend your money as you see fit, and to trust who you choose to trust. And if someone tries to take those rights away from you, even if that someone shares your DNA, shares your name, shares your history, you have not just the right, but the obligation to fight back. Because in the end, the only person responsible for protecting your dignity is you. That's my story. That's my message. And that's my legacy. At 94 years old, I'm still here, still fighting, still living life on my own terms. And I'll be damned if anyone, family or otherwise, ever takes that away from me again. The sun is setting now over Salem, Oregon, painting the sky in those same shades of pink and orange I remember from that fateful morning 3 years ago. But this time, as I rock gently on my porch, surrounded by the life I rebuilt from ashes, I'm not waiting for a surprise. I'm living my life, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of freedom at a time. And that, my friends, is the sweetest victory of all.